Good morning, everyone, and especially those who are new, as well as those who are coming back after Saturday morning's presentation. For those of you who weren't here on Saturday or who haven't been to one of the in-person conferences up north, just a little background. I'm Gordon Saxe. I'm a preventive medicine physician, nutritional epidemiologist, and run the Krupp Center for Integrative Research at University of California, San Diego. And I work very closely with Jeannie and Patrick and a number of others in our group. And this morning, we're going to be talking about the effect of diet in the immune system. This is a really timely topic given what's happening with COVID. And I hope after a short video that we're going to share with you, there'll be, you guys will have whatever questions you want or discussion, wide open to having a free-ranging and fun discussion. So Jeannie, are you ready to start the video?
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Gordon Saxe. Many of my patients come to me asking how to boost their immune system. Indeed, the immune system plays a central role in keeping us healthy and protected from diseases. However, what we really need to do is to balance our immune function, not just boost it, because it's when the immune system is out of balance that problems arise. In some people, the issue may be that the immune system is asleep at the switch, as in cases of immune deficiency. In others, the problem may be a hyperactive immune system, as in autoimmune disease. And in some cases, like cancer, it may be some of both. One very important component of the immune system is the process of inflammation. Ordinarily, inflammation is a beneficial mechanism that helps both to destroy pathogens, harmful bacteria or viruses, and also to repair injured tissue. But if out of control, inflammation can give rise to a variety of diseases marked by damage to normal tissues. That's why anti-inflammatory medications are so popular and why some nutritionally oriented integrative medicine doctors prescribe an anti-inflammatory diet to their patients. So today's lecture is going to focus on how to balance immunity and cool inflammation. I think that a healthy immune system should be kind of like the host at a good dinner party. It's vital, alert, and assertive, but also cool, calm, and collected. It recognizes unwelcome guests, whether a pathogen or a cancer cell, and escorts them out the door gently but firmly without upsetting or inflaming the welcome guests. To better understand the layers of our immune defenses, we can begin by looking from the outside in. We can see that our skin provides a critical first line of defense. When it's healthy, the skin keeps most, but not all, pathogens out. A few manage to slip in through the mouth, nose, or other holes in the body, as well as through any breaks in the skin. A second layer of immune defense is fever. Now, fever works by raising the body temperature to slow the growth and replication of pathogens until it figures out a way to specifically recognize and destroy them, usually by creating antibodies that target them. Another important layer of our immune defenses is our microbiota, the collection of bacteria and other microbes that make up the flora that coats the GI tract, particularly the large intestines. Because the GI tract is constantly coming into contact with outside pathogens in our food, it needs to have extra layers of defense. Healthy microbes, such as the commensal bacteria, occupy specific niches and form an orderly community that provides passive ecological defenses, a physical barrier, as well as elaboration of chemicals toxic to pathogenic microorganisms. After birth, good microbes come primarily from the fermented foods in our diet. Certain things may change the balance of the intestinal flora in a way that harms our immunity. Taking antibiotics can inadvertently wipe out some of the good bacteria and set up an overgrowth of pathogenic ones. So we need to reserve antibiotic use for when it's really needed. Eating meat can also alter microbiota. Studies have shown that people who eat westernized diets high in meat have microbiota profiles found to be pro-inflammatory and to be associated with a variety of autoimmune disease states. Now, I've talked indirectly about things that are pro-inflammatory with somewhat of a negative connotation. However, inflammation in and of itself is not a bad thing. Inflammation is one of the body's first responses to infection or tissue injury. Damaged tissue sends out chemical signals that attract goodies, such as white blood cells and cytokines, to the site of injury to help clear the pathogens and promote wound healing. But inflammation is only good when it's controlled. When the stimulus triggering the inflammatory process is ongoing or chronic, problems ensue. And quite often, the inflammatory stimulus comes from a poor diet. For example, a common way that diet can stimulate inflammation is through the generation of free radicals. Free radicals are unstable molecules that can cause oxidative damage to the body's cells and inflammation of tissues and organs. A common source of free radicals in the diet is polyunsaturated fat, such as corn and vegetable oil. When oils come in contact with heat, air, and light, they begin to oxidize, turn rancid, and generate free radicals. Perhaps the worst offender is oil used in a deep fryer. Oils are not a whole food, so generally I discourage their use. However, some oils, such as olive, sesame, and walnut, can, in moderation, be healthy additions to the diet and aid absorption of fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin E, a potent compound that can neutralize free radicals and prevent oxidative damage. By definition, an antioxidant. Free radicals are also generated when we fry, grill, or barbecue meat, causing the formation of substances called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. PAHs are a double whammy, as they can also be converted into potent carcinogens. The best way to offset damage from free radicals is to eat a diet that's naturally calorically restricted and high in antioxidants. Research suggests that reducing calories by about a third may be the singularly most effective way to slow the aging process, maintain the health of the immune system, extend survival, and prevent the development of cancer. Interestingly enough, when people switch from the standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet, their caloric intake typically drops by about a third, without having to count calories, go hungry, or deny themselves. Another way to offset free radicals is to eat foods rich in antioxidants. For example, dark berries and cherries contain abundant antioxidants called anthocyanins, while orange red and dark leafy green vegetables and fruits contain others called carotenoids, like beta-carotene, lutein, and lycopene, as well as the antioxidant vitamins C and E. Also important are the minerals selenium, which concentrates in onions and sea vegetables, and zinc, best sourced from sesame and pumpkin seeds. Another way dietary factors trigger inflammation has to do with molecules called prostaglandins. Most nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory medications, or NSAIDs, such as ibuprofen and aspirin, operate by blocking the biochemical steps in the conversion of a compound called arachidonic acid into other ones called prostaglandins. And the most abundant source of arachidonic acid comes from animal products in the diet. When we restrict animal products, arachidonic acid levels drop by about 90%. It's an even more effective way to reduce the production of prostaglandins than taking NSAIDs. Uncontrolled inflammation can also be caused by an imbalanced microbiota and by a closely related condition referred to as a leaky gut When we consume a highly refined diet devoid of fiber, and note that fiber is only found in plants, or one that's high in toxic gluten, such as that which is found in some of the most widely consumed and sometimes genetically modified commercial strains of wheat, damage to the gut can occur. And this can lead to the formation of cracks and fissures in the intestinal lining that permit the entry of large molecules from partially digested food directly into the bloodstream. This is called leaky gut syndrome. And in leaky gut syndrome, the immune system mounts a response against these foreign molecules that end up damaging innocent bystander tissues of the body, resulting in inflammation and autoimmune disease. Let's switch gears now and discuss the role of the immune system in cancer. How an underactive immune system can give rise to cancer was first observed in transplant patients who used immunosuppressive medications to prevent their bodies from rejecting a transplanted organ. And it turned out that their risk of developing cancer was greatly increased. Also, in the early days of organ transplantation, doctors recommended high levels of polyunsaturated fat, such as in some margarine, to prevent organ rejection, until they discovered that patients consuming these fats were up to 20 times more likely to develop secondary cancers. Other immunosuppressive agents, such as radiation, have long been known to lead to the development of cancer. Radiation is an interesting topic. One of my med school professors was the director of the Radiation Effects Research Foundation in Hiroshima, Japan, the site of the first atomic bomb dropped in World War II. By studying atomic bomb survivors, researchers discovered that high levels of radiation exposure had two effects. In the short term, a sharply increased risk of acute leukemia, and in the long term, an increased risk of lung, thyroid, breast, and other cancers. And it may be that the Japanese have the most to teach us about how to use foods to protect against radiation. In Nagasaki, the site of the second atomic bombing, St. Francis Hospital, located about a mile from the epicenter, survived the initial blast. On one ward of the hospital, there was a physician named Dr. Akazuki who fed his patients a traditional whole food, plant-based Japanese diet that included barley porridge, Hokkaido pumpkin, and miso soup with seaweed. On the other wards, the patients were fed a more westernized diet. 55 years later, researchers followed up the health outcomes of patients from St. Francis Hospital and found that at that time, still about a third of the patients on Dr. Akazuki's ward were still alive, and none of these surviving patients had developed leukemia or other cancers. Almost all other patients from the hospital had died. More recent studies have shown that some of the foods Dr. Akazuki fed to his patients contain both potent radioprotective and cancer protective effects. For example, the seaweed in the miso soup contains a compound called sodium alginate, which binds heavy metals like cesium and strontium, as well as their respective radioactive isotopes, and actually clears them from the body through the GI tract. In addition, seaweed is a rich source of iodine, which saturates the thyroid gland and prevents it from taking up radioactive iodine, specifically protecting against thyroid cancer. We also know that pumpkin is rich in antioxidants, and miso is teeming with active cultures like lactobacillus and bifidus. Now let's talk about another important line of defense against cancer, immune surveillance, a function provided by natural killer or NK cells. NK cells identify tumor cells circulating in the bloodstream and orchestrate an immune response against them before they can take root and form a tumor. Fortunately, a variety of foods and herbs have been found to increase the level of natural killer or NK cells. Several of these are mushrooms. Shiitake and maitake mushrooms have both been shown to increase the number and function of NK cells, as well as the levels of anti-cancer macrophages and cytokines. So do mushrooms called cordyceps and reishi, often found in Chinese herbal formulas. And so does ginseng, a root that's prized in Asia and has been used for centuries to promote vitality. In Chinese medicine, it's believed that these herbal foods would boost what they called the Wei Qi, a protective energy of the body akin to the immune system. And again, perhaps the most effective way to prevent or stop the growth of cancer and to simultaneously support the health of the immune system is through caloric restriction. Regardless of how cancer is triggered in the first place, whether by chemical carcinogens, radiation, or viruses, research suggests that caloric restriction may either dramatically slow or stop cancer in its tracks. Conversely, obesity has been found to greatly worsen the health outcomes of those with cancer. Scientists believe that one reason is because fat tissue is extremely metabolically active and the site where inflammatory mediators such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha are produced and that drive inflammation. Kind of like pouring gasoline on the fire of a growing cancer. Another way that inflammation may accelerate cancer is by promoting angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels, part of the inflammatory process to support tissue repair. Almost 30 years ago, researchers discovered that in order for a cancer to grow, it requires a steadily increasing blood supply delivered via blood vessels. So, by cooling inflammation, it may be possible to also turn off the angiogenesis that feeds cancer growth. Interestingly, most of the foods that have been found to have anti-angiogenic properties are the same ones thought to be anti-inflammatory. So, the best way to naturally balance the immune system and cool inflammation is, you guessed it, a balanced diet and lifestyle. First and foremost, I recommend follow a whole food plant-based diet incorporating the 5 pillars approach. These are 1. Eat plants. 2. In their whole form. 3. Balanced with variety, color, texture, taste, cooking method, and personal need. 4. Focusing on those that are locally grown and in season. And 5. That whenever possible are organically or biodynamically grown. If you do this, you will automatically be avoiding excess calories, which, again, perhaps more than any other single factor, inhibits cancer, cools inflammation, and helps maintain the vitality of the immune system over the course of one's lifetime. Second, be sure to emphasize antioxidant-rich foods, such as whole grains, like brown rice, beans and legumes, seeds and nuts high in B vitamins and vitamin E, and gut health supporting insoluble fiber. Also, cabbage family vegetables such as cabbage, broccoli, kale, collards, and turnip greens that are rich in carotenoids, vitamin C, and other beneficial phytonutrients. Onion family vegetables such as onions, leeks, and garlic that are rich in antioxidants such as the mineral selenium and the compound allicin. Fruits such as dark berries and cherries rich in anthocyanins and insoluble fiber, and sea vegetables rich in trace minerals taken up from ocean water as well as radioprotective factors. Third, reduce exposure to pro-inflammatory arachidonic acid by limiting or cutting meat out of your diet, and especially avoiding fried or grilled meats high in free radicals. Also, to reduce free radicals, use only high-quality cold-pressed oils, use them sparingly, and keep them refrigerated. Fourth, maintain a healthy gut by regularly consuming fermented foods like miso, tempeh, naturally prepared pickles, and sauerkraut. Fifth, and finally, try to incorporate immune potentiating foods such as shiitake and maitake mushrooms, turmeric root, green and kukicha tea, and others into your diet. By using the natural healing power of foods to balance your immune system, you're giving yourself the gift of a lifetime. Use your imagination with these dietary recommendations and you'll bring color and vitality to your body and your life.
Anyway, So I guess the floor is open for any questions, comments. I'll start off with just a comment of my own, which is I actually thought that we were going to be showing a different video than this one, but this is fine because, as it turns out, it illustrates a lot of points that, while they're focused maybe a little more on cancer, have huge applicability to COVID and a lot of other conditions. And so I think that a lot of the topics that were touched on here, the role of the gut microbiome and the collective microbiota, which is the aggregate collection of microbes in the body. The microbiome refers to the genes associated with the microbiota, and also the role of inflammation in a number of conditions, the role of leaky gut. A number of these topics have applicability to the topic du jour, COVID, as well as to many other conditions. So I am looking to see what questions people have. So far, I'm not getting any questions or any comments. So I don't know if there's a way to unmute folks so that they can speak, so everybody can hear their questions or comments.
Gordon, can you hear me?
I do, yes.
So we just have to go to the lower left of our screen and unmute.
Okay.
Individually, cool. Because Jeannie and Patrick have opened it, I guess.
Got you. Okay.
Thank you so much for this information. I wish I could have it all memorized. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I've been spouting these things for years, and I still don't have it all memorized. But okay. So let's see. Some question on the thyroid. Is it safe to just eat an anti-inflammatory diet? Well, there's a lot more to the question of what to do with the thyroid than just eating an anti-inflammatory diet. It very much depends on why the thyroid was removed. There's a condition called thyroiditis, inflammation of the thyroid, often referred to as Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And in that case, when I have patients with that, we might have a treatment that's targeted to the thyroid itself to raise or lower as needed the production of thyroid hormone, but also, since it's part of a general condition, an inflammatory overall condition, it's also important to treat it with inflammation in mind. And that brings us back to the same kind of things that were recommended in the video. Another question, how quickly do various inflammatory processes reverse or get better? I'd say probably within a day or less. Now, that doesn't mean they'll go away, but it means that if you're doing something that drives an inflammatory process, just simply a couple of really clean anti-inflammatory, I hate to use the word anti-inflammatory diet or anti-inflammatory meals, because that's really, the dietary changes are not just that. They do many things at once, but you can see results. You can see results in a matter of hours, just looking at certain metrics. So, for example, I know years ago, in my early days of macrobiotics, that I would go on a greens fast, try different kinds of fasts, brown rice, greens, and so forth. I would cook up and eat a mess of like kale or turnip greens or other dark leafy greens like that. And I noticed that the next day I would awaken and my skin would look better, and things, a little bit of redness would disappear, stuff like that, signs of inflammation. That doesn't mean that an underlying autoimmune disease that's driven by inflammation will disappear overnight. It just means that you can see the first signs of that change very quickly. And let's see, next question. How do you make sea vegetables palatable? You have to try different recipes. That one is one that I probably should defer to Jeannie and Patrick in one of their cooking classes. But I'm gonna just tell you about one of my favorite ways of making sea vegetables palatable. I don't know if anybody here has used Canton or made Canton, which uses agar. And agar comes in a couple of different forms. You can buy it in bars that look almost like clear styrofoam, and also in flakes that are easy to measure. Anyway, one of my favorites is I will cook Canton, or rather agar, slow cook it with a little bit of vanilla, diluted fruit juice, like organic fruit juice, and pour it over freshly cut seasonal fruit, and it will gel. And it will form like a natural jello that's not made from the hooves of cows, but made from a plant source. And after it gels, I'll refrigerate it, and several hours later, when it's ready, top it with whipped almond with a hint of vanilla, maybe a raspberry and a mint leaf. So that's pretty palatable. Okay. What other questions? What do you think of hemp seed oil and CBD oil to help autoimmune skin conditions? I think that these may be beneficial, but I start with the diet as a whole, and think in terms of how to address autoimmune conditions, whether impacting the skin or any other tissue of the body. I don't know the literature on hemp seed and CBD specifically for autoimmune skin conditions, so I can't really tell you a whole lot about that. I think it's probably something that hasn't been that well studied. There are probably, that is, informal, properly designed studies, but I'm sure that there's a lot of anecdotes out there about people who've used it topically, applied it to skin, areas of inflamed skin or autoimmune damaged skin, and could be of benefit. A lot of skin conditions will do well with a combination of an internal and an external treatment coming at it from both sides. So proper change to a proper diet that reduces inflammation so it's no longer driving the process, coupled with something applied topically that's soothing. So getting it from both sides, I think, is probably the best strategy in general for skin conditions. Can you be privately messaged about this thyroid removal challenge? Yeah, or drop me an email. My favorite sea vegetable recipe is arame, tahini, sliced dill pickle. Oh, okay. I'm an arame fan myself, and I like dill pickles. Haven't tried them together. Add sauteed onions to your sea vegetables. Also, corn. I actually cook corn and onions together with arame. It comes out really nice. Thanks for all these suggestions. If you cook kombu into a pot of beans, it will completely disappear and you won't taste it. I actually recommend to patients that they eat beans and that they try cooking kombu into it, and cook it long enough, not 30 minutes. You've got to cook it for a while, and the kombu will disintegrate, and it seems to make the beans a little more digestible. It changes their texture, and it's a really nice texture the way it comes out. And there's no way to describe it other than to, you have to try it to see what I'm referring to. But kombu works really well with cooked with beans. There's my email address. Somebody said, I've heard that some CBD products can be healing for the GI tract. Do you have any information about that? Again, I haven't focused that much on the various effects of CBDs. We're doing a couple of studies at UCSD involving CBDs or the cannabinoid, the endocannabinoid system, but not on either GI or skin. But it would make sense. A lot of skin conditions are the result of damage to the lining of the gut, and the lining of the gut is epithelial, as is the surface, the skin, epithelial cells. And so that the idea that something that could be beneficial to one could be beneficial to the other, to me makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that's all I have in the way of questions from you guys. Anybody want to start a conversation? Unmute yourself, reveal yourself. In the meantime, I'll just keep reading what people have written here. Can you speak on dairy products causing inflammation? Well, yeah, there's a number of compounds in dairy that are not, especially after a certain age, that are not things that the body is able to receive easily. And included in that mix are large proteins that, if they're not adequately broken down, go into the GI tract. They can cause problems. And if a person has leaky gut, damage to the lining, some of those not fully digested large proteins can leak into the surrounding circulation. And there the immune system sees them as foreign. And this is actually something that has been hypothesized as a cause for some individuals of type 1 diabetes. So in other words, it's particularly an issue for little kids between the ages of 6 months and 2 years. Up until age 6 months, the infant is benefiting from its mother's IgA, this immunoglobulin, one of the immune component that helps to fight off infection and other problems. After about 6 months, what it's inherited from its mom begins to wane, but there's this gap up until 2 years before it's really begun to develop its own IgA. And so infants during that time are highly vulnerable. And one of the thoughts is that, highly vulnerable, I should say, to infection. And so one of the thoughts is that if a baby is weaned on formula, on cow's milk rather, not on natural breast milk, it doesn't get some of the immunoglobulins conferred by the breast milk that it needs. And in addition, its gut is immature. And during that same 6 month to 2 year period, the immature gut, when you take in the cow's milk, it tends to be leaky. And so some of these proteins, especially leaky, and some of these proteins get out, and they look very much like they have what's referred to as homology with some of the cells in the pancreas, the beta cells that produce insulin. And so the immune system, in attacking the proteins from the cow's milk that have leaked into the body during that sensitive time frame, also attack the beta cells, or the thought is they attack the beta cells in the pancreas and wipe them out. When that happens, then the baby develops type 1 diabetes due to damage to the insulin producer, the destruction of the insulin producing cells. And so there's been a lot of concern that dairy in that setting is especially harmful. Any clues particularly helpful to emotional resilience in these times? Food and emotional resilience. So interesting question, because we are going, I'd say a year from now, we are going to see an absolute epidemic of anxiety, depression, and a number of other emotional, psychological conditions. And so how do we help people with these? Obviously, the stresses that everybody's experiencing, but particularly exacerbated for some individuals with, the financial crisis and, the lack of ability to, congregate, and a lot of other things, or having to congregate with people who may not be the best people for you, can't get away. I mean, all kinds of things are leading to stress for people right now. There's no solution other than addressing the underlying stressors, the things that are creating those problems. And unfortunately, that's not easily within reach. But two different individuals could respond entirely different to the same set of stressors. One individual who does not have a hyperactive HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, could respond to stress much more calmly without generating a full-blown stress response compared with somebody else who does not have a calm and resilient HPA, which is part of the psychoneuroimmunology of the body. One of the things that can influence that is not so much diet, but a practice of meditation, other things that in the mind-body arena that help to balance that stress response. In terms of diet, a couple of thoughts. First, the gut microbiome is really, really important in this. It's been the wrong kinds of foods, particularly refined and processed foods, tend to feed unhealthy gut microbes. And on the other hand, fibrous plant foods, whole grains, beans, legumes, proper array of vegetables, fibrous fruit, and so forth, these tend to nourish healthy gut microbes. When the balance between the unhealthy pathogenic ones and the healthy ones is out of whack, not enough healthy, too many pathogenic, signals that are normally sent from the gut to the central nervous system and the brain get perturbed. And when that happens, genes in the central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, but particularly in several areas of the brain, that code for the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and gabapentin, or GABA rather, gamma-aminobenzoic acid. These genes shut down, or the expression of these of serotonin and GABA get diminished. When that happens, we tend to experience more depression, more anxiety, and we also have a higher sensitivity to pain. So by rebalancing the gut microbiome, by removing the foods that stimulate the growth of pathogenic microbes and enhancing the production of our normal healthy microbes with fibrous plant food, and also inoculating on a regular basis with fermented foods like miso and sauerkraut, that combination will help to grow a healthy gut microbiome, the right microbiota, and in the process will smooth out the signals to the brain and can help raise the pain threshold so the person is no longer, little touch and it's like, ow, instead of whack and it's like, ow. That's the difference between a high pain threshold, whack, and it's like, ow, and a low pain threshold, ow. So the proper gut microbiome fed by the right foods will raise the pain threshold, reduce depression, which is often referred to as psychic pain, often by the same mechanisms, and reduce anxiety. So I think that combination is really the best combo. Now, there are a few supplements, or I should say supplemental foods that might be beneficial. One that I'm a big fan of is reishi mushrooms. And mushrooms in general, I think, tend to be calming and centering. Also, there are some herbs like ashwagandha, lavender, things like that may also be very calming and help to reduce depression and anxiety. So obviously dealing with the underlying causes is what we all need to do, but how we respond can be influenced strongly. Are there any foods you would recommend that helps with acne, inflammation to skin and supports healthy skin? Well, really, I mean, in a way, I hate to say it's like one size fits all, but really the same kinds of things that tend to help with the signaling from the gut to the brain, or with inflammation of other tissues will help with inflammation that results in acne or other specific skin problems. A way of looking at this is to think in terms of a spark and then the gasoline. We all accumulate, we all have different weak points. Maybe we inherited the wrong genes, and we have some biochemical weak point that we're highly susceptible to some condition in our lives. For other people, maybe we experience some kind of trauma early in our life. And that trauma, for example, a knee injury that increases the likelihood that you're going to have knee osteoarthritis later in life. Maybe we got exposed to the wrong chemicals and we damage cells and have a higher risk of cancer. In each of these cases, there's a spark, a susceptibility. We all accumulate or have different points of susceptibility in our bodies from a number of different things, but they don't have to turn into raging fires. The reason I think that the recommendations may sound the same from one condition to the next is that because regardless of the spark, the gasoline is still pretty common. It's an imbalance in the diet, an imbalance in how we respond to stress and other things. And if we can balance these things and have a healthy diet, in the process, we stop pouring the gasoline and help to reduce whatever the problem is from whatever spark has been exacerbated or inflamed. So really the recommendation for skin, for acne, is very much the same as for other conditions. Are there some specific additional herbs or medical foods? There may be, and that would be something that we could talk about one-on-one at another time. But I think the overall approach is similar and reduces many problems simultaneously. Okay. All right. Well, I've kind of come to the end of the list of current questions. Anybody want to talk? Anybody brave enough to talk and have a dialogue?
I am.
Who's I?
Elaine Danforth.
Hi, Elaine. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Gordon?
I'm doing well.
My curiosity is, what are the common macrobiotic diet typical foods that could be eaten in excess or improperly prepared that might tend to exacerbate inflammation and harm immunity the most?
Okay.
I mean, I'm worried about, I know I eat too many nuts and seeds, and like how important it is to like prepare them better. Yeah, I mean, personally, I have joint issues, and it's frustrating, because a lot of people look at the way I eat and they just can't believe it. They think it's incredibly disciplined, but I have issues. And I did have, as you mentioned, a knee injury, and that's I've been able to build my function back so that I can ski maybe better now than I ever did, but there are persistent issues with that joint and with other joints.
Yeah. Okay. So there may be some things in in what Michio Kushi defined as a standard macrobiotic diet, although I'm not sure I even like the idea, because diet really needs to be so different, maybe from one person living in one part of the world to another, or a person who's older or younger, or male, female, working hard, more cerebral. There's so many differences that maybe there really needs to be an understanding that diet can be very, very different, even if the underlying principles are similar. what foods in a standard macrobiotic diet? Well, I think for some people, maybe we have too heavy a reliance on grain, on whole grain. And while I think that in general in our society, we don't eat enough, and I feel like intact kernel whole grain in particular, as opposed to flour products, intact kernel whole grain has been villainized, tarred by the same brushstrokes, by the same paintbrush as gluten issues or refined flour products. The distinction is night and day. There are some people who do have a problem with grain. I've had them in my practice, and they eliminate certain grains from their diet, even ones that I would tend to think are healing and healthy, and they do better. And so some people may be consuming the wrong grains or too much of a percentage of their diet as grain, although I think some people probably have to have more. And we have to rethink the way we villainize them. So I think for some people, too much grain and not enough, especially of like leafy green vegetables, which are potently anti-inflammatory. I think also I think Elaine, you addressed seeds and nuts and things like that, and that was actually the first thing that went through my mind also, and that is that oils that have too high a ratio of omega-6 fats within them and not enough omega-3 could be quite inflammatory. Remember, in the early days of cookbooks, of macrobiotic cookbooks, there were recipes that included corn oil, corn oil, corn oil. And corn oil is whoppingly high in omega-6 and is anti-inflammatory. It was actually the oil that was used in the lecture I was giving there before the video that was used to...
It's inflammatory. You said anti-inflammatory.
I meant to say it's inflammatory.
Okay.
It's fire. It's, yeah. And sorry if I misspoke there. And it was the oil, corn oil was the one that was used to actually induce immunosuppression in animals in some of the earlier studies of organ rejection and cancer. So, so I think we probably need to rethink both the amount and perhaps reduce the amount of oil overall, and reconsider some of our favorite oils or widely used oils. That might be something that's important. And beyond that, I have to give it a little thought. One thing I also wanted to add, just to get at the issue you were talking about, arthritis, the knee issue. And that is, it's a concept I wanted to talk about the other day, but I didn't quite click at the time. And it's a concept referred to as the therapeutic order. So in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and in modern day naturopathic medicine, which really articulated the therapeutic order concept, there was an understanding that when a person is sick, you don't automatically resort to the most aggressive extreme treatment. You start off, if possible, if it's not an emergency, you start off with doing things to establish the conditions for health. Think of a pyramid. Well, the base of the pyramid are things like proper diet, proper physical activity, and getting your kind of smoothing out how you think and your meditation. When that's not sufficient, and that, by the way, is usually sufficient, large percentage of the time for so many problems, and they'll disappear without having to medicalize them or turn them into an emergency that isn't. When that's not sufficient and a problem persists in spite of that, that's when you go up to the next level in the therapeutic order and you use natural therapies, natural therapeutics, but in a more, that are more targeted. So that might be the time for acupuncture or for certain medical foods or herbs. When you still are having a problem in spite of your best efforts, that's when we get into allopathic medicines, surgical procedures, or different types of procedures. The base is diet. The apex would be something more along the lines of, like if you're having a heart transplant, being on the heart-lung machine and the doctors are breathing for you and beating your heart for you. They take complete control. I am not recommending that for knee problems or for a headache. But if it's genuinely an emergency and life is at risk or some vital function is at risk, you go as high up that thing as quickly as possible until you get to the right level to deal with the problem. And then once that problem is stabilized and there's a protected space, then you move back down to the bottom to diet and lifestyle. And but too often we medicalize minor issues. It's because doctors don't have in their toolkit diet and lifestyle guidance or even natural therapeutics. And so they too quickly move up this therapeutic hierarchy to pharmaceuticals and beyond. And they do that, and sometimes it works, but more often it doesn't, or it causes side effects that were unnecessary. The only side effects from diet and lifestyle change generally are it helps to reduce your blood pressure, it helps to reduce your cholesterol, it clears up skin problems, and it makes you feel better and happier. So the only side effects are good ones, but often it's not. Sometimes it's not, I should say often, sometimes it's not sufficient. And Elaine, I don't know the full story of what's going on with your knee. I would say that I had some knee issues like a year and a half ago, and I found the right kinds of therapeutic exercises under the guidance of a physical therapist was absolutely terrific and solved the problem when my own change of diet and things like that were not able to address it. So I think we need to think more broadly than just diet. Diet is critical, but it's not the whole story.
Thank you. I have another issue with PT, but just another issue. I've been having PT, but of course the pandemic is like, I don't want to go in there. They have people they're not right next to each other anymore, but just doesn't seem like a safe place to go.
Just to throw this into the mix there, I was having like the end of my knee stuff and doing a few therapeutic exercises with my own physical therapist around the beginning of the pandemic, back around February, March timeframe, when everything suddenly came unraveled. And he had to, shut down his office, unfortunately. And then I heard very shortly thereafter that he had decided that for some individuals, if they were interested, he would do it by telemedicine or telehealth. And on the one hand, it seems like, well, you can't get a manual treatment, but I think the exercises that are part of physical therapy are maybe more important than the treatment that you get, the ultrasound or the massage, as nice as it feels. It's the empowerment you get by learning how to do the therapeutic exercises that is more freeing and healing in the long run. One of the things that I've learned is, when I do physical therapy in a physical therapist's office, he's got some cool toys and things, but I don't have those at home. And so I do the exercises when I'm there in the office, but then I go home and it's like, what do I do now? So by having that telehealth boost at home, the physical therapist can actually see my environment. I can show him my stairs and the railing. And he says, oh, you have the makings of a such and such machine. All you have to do is hold the railing, step up with your left leg to the second step, and then step back down. Now repeat, and with your right leg and rinse. And he can figure out, she could figure out all kinds of home-based things that are far more practical that will fit into your routine and don't require you to go to their office. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I have to look up and see if anybody's doing that near me.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Or it doesn't have to be near me, I guess.
And they're having to, because because their in-office demand has like fallen off of a cliff.
Well, my one, which is like it was perfect because it was like a 5-minute walk from my house, and they're there. I could go, but I don't want to. They haven't advertised virtual services.
You're not alone. I think that a lot of them are taking great precautions, to keep people from getting sick, and they have to just to protect their own staff and themselves. But I think that adding in this telehealth element could really have a benefit, an unexpected benefit. We've noticed with our online cooking classes, while it doesn't have the same group cohesion in some ways as having a group together in a teaching kitchen, at the same time, like somebody like Jeannie, who can then see people in their environment, can get a better sense of how to help them, and it forces them to be the ones doing the cooking. They can't be passive, and just simply getting their hands involved can actually add to their learning of it and the healing dynamic. So paradoxically, some of this is turning out to be really beneficial.
Well, thank you, Jordan.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Let's see. Next thing. My mom broke her knee 8 years ago and was told recently that she has arthritis. Because she has been macro for 45 years, she has never experienced any pain. Okay, I'll let that one speak for itself. What can I tell my in-laws who are all into keto? I know that long-range problems will develop, but they only see short-term weight loss. Oh, great question. So one of the problems with a diet that involves a high percentage of carbohydrate, there are 3 macronutrients: fat, carbohydrate, protein. And the body produces glucose out of carbohydrate. And when we have a diet that's high in refined or simple carbohydrates like white sugar, white flour, we tend to increase our blood glucose level. That tends to stimulate weight gain, obesity, and to be inflammatory to the body, and to stimulate or worsen a lot of health problems. It may also be a driver of cancer, chronically elevated glucose level, and certainly diabetes. So in response to that, people have said, well, if we remove all carbohydrate from our diet, but particularly those evil grains, and we focus on a diet that helps the body to generate an alternative fuel source, ketone bodies. In other words, a ketogenic diet that causes ketone bodies to form and no longer produces glucose, then we can run the body effectively on these ketone bodies, a ketogenic diet, and that will provide ketone bodies to run the brain and to run all the energy requiring needs of the body. It is true that that happens when people follow a high-fat diet out of which ketone bodies are made. But there are other ways to achieve ketogenesis that don't have the hazards of high-fat foods. When you think of high-fat foods, you think of things like meat, which are also very high in protein, maybe too high in protein. Colin Campbell in the China study made the case from his data that too high an intake of animal food, even though it may be beneficial in terms of ketogenesis, also is too high in protein, and that's a driver of cancer. Too high an intake of protein is hard on the kidneys. It's also a driver of negative calcium balance, which pulls calcium out of the bones, and over time will lead to osteopenia, or eventually, if it's not resolved, to osteoporosis. So there's another way to reduce carbs, or I should say, to reduce glucose levels and sometimes to raise ketones without having an animal food rich diet. And that is a combination of intermittent fasting. We were talking about that on Saturday, where like overnight you don't eat for maybe 12 hours on the average, or even a little bit longer. What happens there is that the body begins, after it's kind of burned up the carbs and the glucose that's available, it starts to then tap into your own body fat reserves. It starts to cannibalize those reserves and produces ketone bodies out of your own fat. That's a good process. And it doesn't require the ingestion of animal food or high fat food, just simply not eating for a certain period of time. When you start breaking down or catabolizing those fat stores, things that are stored up in the fat, toxins that are sitting there inert, will be released and hopefully clear out of the body. And so it's a way of also detoxifying the body. And in the process, we've even seen that stem cells, like the stem cells that are needed for producing healthy bone marrow, will begin to regenerate when you do that kind of fasting process on a regular basis. No animal food required for that. Another way that you can generate ketone bodies, and we think that our Paleolithic ancestors, who were mostly eating plant food and had very high carb diets, but were always kind of dancing on the edge of ketosis, it was because often there was no food. And so they were naturally forced into a period of semi-starvation. And, but I would also add that you can also achieve this by nourishing a healthy gut microbiome with fibrous plant foods. Healthy gut microbes will naturally produce healthy ketone bodies, alpha-butyric acid in the gut, which then get absorbed into the body and circulate widely. They're anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer, and they're the natural product of gut microbes. So combination of the proper kind of diet punctuated by intermittent fasting, physical activity and so forth can generate ketone bodies and reduce inflammation by ketosis without having to have animal food. This just when people go ketone or keto, it doesn't mean meat. It can be done a very different way, and there's a way to thread the needle. And I say to my macrobiotic brethren, let's claim the label ketosis and take it away from all of these heavy meat eaters. Our Paleolithic ancestors did not have Costco where you get giant, half of a cow, and they didn't have a second freezer to store it in. They were eating hand to mouth, from the riverbed, from the leaves and the tubers and the wild, grass seeds, wild grain. So they have no claim, in my view, on ketogenesis. So that's the beginning of what I would tell your in-laws. And I would be gentle with them. Fasting has more research now, somebody said. Anyway, any last questions? I think we're pretty close to our limit here. Any other questions, comments? Anybody brave enough to speak up and reveal themselves?
If anyone wants to speak, just unmute yourself.
Gordon,
this is David Rubin from Baltimore.
Hi, David.
Previously Pikesville. And that was one of the finest presentations, including the video, I've ever seen. It's just incredible. I'm talking with Jean about how to somehow make your presentation available to everyone here in the Northeast. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. The time it took you to put that together, it must have been enormous. And the impact, I can't wait for young people to see that. It's what we've been looking for to get people to see the benefits of eating this way. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be in contact at a future time.
Well, thank you very much. That's quite a compliment. I thought there was somebody else's voice I heard. Anybody else?
Yes, I was trying to speak. It's Judith Loomis, and I have a friend who has gotten older, and during that time, his dark green leafy eating has given him massive headaches. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions.
I'd need to know more of the details about what he's doing, why, what else is going on, why he's getting those headaches. He may be attributing it to the leafy greens, and he might be right. But on the other hand, just because somebody makes that equation doesn't mean that's really what's going on. So without knowing more of the details, it's a little hard to say. Feel free to contact me and, can continue that discussion.
Will do. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks for the question, Judith.
You're welcome.
I also included Gordon's email address in the chat conversation. Probably, scroll up. It'll be more towards the front of the chat area.
Jeannie, do I have time to answer or address one more question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so somebody asked a question which I think is really salient: how to deal with the pressure of vaccinations. Wow, that's such a timely and big question. And I guess I was watching Harris being interviewed the other day, Kamala Harris, about and was asked the question of, would you take a vaccine if, if it was recommended? And she said something which I was a little surprised to hear, but not really in the context. And she said it would have to be proven to her that it's really safe and effective. And that far, I go along with her. If vaccines are not necessarily evil, and in a sense, one could even argue that they reflect a kind of a homeopathic principle. Something very small resonates with and neutralizes the same thing very large. So I'm open to the idea that that vaccinations could be an important part of the mix, but that doesn't mean that we should pressure people into taking them. I think that will be so incredibly counterproductive if we do, especially if they're rolled out too quickly, especially if they're rolled out for political purposes, for political gain. I understand how important it is to solve the problem, this pandemic as soon as possible. But I think that vaccination could be part of the mix, an important part, but we have to be really, really careful about what we do. And I would love to see them much more thoroughly tested than I'm afraid they might be before we start receiving that pressure. There was a really interesting debate between Kennedy, I think it's Robert Kennedy Jr., and Alan Dershowitz. If you Google Dershowitz and Kennedy and vaccine, you'll find the YouTube video for this, I'm pretty sure. Fascinating, where they were basically having a debate where Dershowitz was taking the pro-vaccine side and Kennedy the anti-vaccine side. And Kennedy had some really compelling points that I wish a lot of people who automatically dismiss vaccinators would listen to. It doesn't mean that we should adopt a total anti-vaxxer approach, but we need to hear what the concerns are and have a dialogue. And one thing that Dershowitz did concede is that being forceful and trying to pressure people into receiving vaccines is likely to be counterproductive and is, if anything, is only a last resort and certainly nothing we should, try and make policy. I think, I'm guessing we're probably out of time at this point.
Jordan, you can take it. You got one more. Go for it.
Okay.
I fast regular, but the blood pressure stays quite low. Any suggestions?
Is that a bad thing? I don't know most people would like to have lower blood pressure. Is it dangerously low? I don't have enough from that to know what to make of that. Oh, somebody just wrote here regarding Kennedy and Dershowitz. If YouTube has removed the info, you can find plenty on Brian Rose's site, London Real. Okay, never heard of that. The person who asked about blood pressure said that they feel it's too low. Yeah, it's a little too complex a question to go into now. That requires a longer discussion, and so it's, I am not quite sure how to answer that with in this context, and happy to discuss it, but we probably need to do that one-on-one. Okay, I think we should probably wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the questions, your attention, and thank you, and I hope that this has generated some ideas and useful, helpful information for all of you. And
thank you, Gordon, for joining us today. That was a great class. And just a reminder to everybody, there is Gordon's email address in the chat area if you want to grab that real quick and get a hold of him separately. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care, and thanks, Gordon.
bye.
Bye-bye.